Hi all. Thank you for joining us at 12:30 for the lunch and learn, but I know that we always have some stragglers shortly after, so we'll probably give us maybe a minute or two for those who have yet to join us, and then we'll start today's session. Okie dokie. I reckon I might get us started now, and let me know if you're not able to hear me. You can ping me a message. I have that all sorted. But I just thought I'd start today by saying that this session is going to be recorded. While we try our best to make these educational lunch and learns as accessible as possible to our members, we do understand that quite a few people are shift workers or work in customer-facing roles where it's hard to get away from the counter, or maybe just simply don't work on a Thursday. And as such, we record these sessions so that members who request a copy of these lunch and learns can be given a link and watch and learn at a time that works for them and the way in which they work. But with that being said, let's start today's session. And I'd first like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to struggle for rights and reconciliation. And we pay our respects to the elders past and present. Now, in today's lunch and learn session, we'll be covering off on two main parts of Employment Direction 1. But first and foremost, we need to tell you what Employment Direction 1 is. Once we've done that, we'll then move on to the new WINS, which is the fixed term conversion to permanency and the permanent increase to part-time hours. And why is this important? Well, this is a win from the last PSU WA, and for those who have been coming to these lunch and learns for a while, you know that we still have these wins coming up and that they're really important to the way in which people in the state service operate and have, in this instance, job security. In our last round of bargaining, we did campaign for a firm entitlement for employees to elect to be permanent, and the entitlements that we're going to be talking about today were compromises reached from those negotiations. These come from the fact that previously there were no clear pathways for conversion for these fixed term employees or for employees that were working on part-time contracts that regularly worked over their part-time hours. These are steps forward in improving job security and bring us more into line with what we've seen in the Fair Work jurisdiction. But as you know, we're coming up to the next round of PSU WA bargaining next year. So if there's things that could still be improved, we're more than happy to hear those suggestions. So starting us off, what is ED1? So ED, or Employment Direction 1, is a separate entitlement that you wouldn't find under your award or your agreement. It's actually something that is signed off by the Premier of the day because it's connected to the State Service Act. And because it's connected to the State Service Act, it means that it applies to anyone who is employed under that Act, regardless of what award or agreement they're employed under. So to put that into perspective, if you are, say, employed in NRE under the Tasmanian State Service Award, this will apply to you the same way that it would apply to someone who is in the Department of Health under the Health and Human Services Award, because you are both employed under the State Service Act. Now, with that background information as to what ED1 is, we'll move on to some of the more recent changes, that being the fixed term to permanent conversion. And there's actually 3 ways in which an employment status can change. The first one being transmission of business, pathway, or critical risk. Second is the performance of same or similar duties for 12 or more months. And this is going to be the one that we're really focusing on in our next couple of slides. But then there's also a catch-all, not a catch-all, but a catch for the special and exceptional circumstances. So if you don't quite fit into the first 2 mentioned, but you have such special and exceptional circumstances that would warrant you being changed from a fixed term to a permanent employee, this would be the provision that would apply to you. But as I said, today we are going to be focusing on the performance of same or similar duties. So there's a couple of criteria that go along with this one. First one is that you are currently a fixed term employee who has completed 12 months of continuous service in same or similar duties. From there, these duties and hours of the position are required on an ongoing basis. Conduct and performance of the employee is satisfactory. And one of the ways that you can tell if your performance has been satisfactory is through your regular PDPs. So long as you're not told that you're underperforming, it's taken that you are satisfactory. Merit has been applied. If you are in a position in the state service, it is taken that merit has been applied, because merit is applied in the initial stage of recruitment. So if you are successful in a position, it is taken that you have merit. There's also no other reasons to change employment status. And I have just seen that we had a question pop up, but I might try and answer those questions at the end if that's okay, just so we can try and do it all together at one. So with this new conversion method, we do know that there has been at least one successful application. So someone in the Department of Justice has performed their 12 months of continuous service in same or similar duties, hours and position are required, their performance has been satisfactory, and they were converted to permanent. So that's a real big win, because this change to the ED only came into effect at the end of July of this year. One thing to note is that recent interpretation of fixed term has been taken to mean a fixed term employee and not necessarily a fixed term contract. What that means is that if you hold a substantive or a permanent position in another agency and you have taken up a fixed term contract in a current agency, you might not be able to apply for permanency in your new agency under this provision, purely because you're not quite a fixed term employee. You are considered permanent under the State Service Act. You're just taken on a fixed term contract role. It is also important to note that if you are an approving manager or you are being supported by your manager to go through this conversion process, the State Service Management Office has published guidelines on how this process is to run. So if you or your manager are needing assistance from workplace relations, they should have on hand guidelines and an agency kit as to how this works. Now, what happens if you're a fixed term casual? Just because they're slightly different to a general fixed term. However, same criteria applies, but there are going to be some additional steps for these fixed term casual employees. They first of all have to show that they have worked a regular and systematic pattern of hours for the last 12 months. So say, for instance, if they're a casual employee who is able to show that they have regularly worked a Tuesday and a Thursday, then that would be a tick in their favour. The other step is that they have a reasonable expectation of ongoing employment. This one may be a little bit tricky. So if you are a fixed term casual that is looking at applying for conversion, more than welcome to shoot us a message, because this might depend on individual circumstances as to whether or not there was a reasonable expectation. And what is a lunch and learn without us having a template on hand? We already have a template for people who are seeking to convert their employment status from fixed term to permanent. If you are wanting a copy of this for yourself to go through the process, or for someone that you know that's a member in your workplace, you can flick us a message to CPSU Direct. We'll have our contact information at the end of the lunch and learn. For some reason, my slides do not want to change. Don't mind me and my technology. So the next win was that permanent hours increase for permanent part-time employees. So this is for permanent part-time employees who've, say, been appointed at 0.4 of an FTE, but for the period of 12 months or more have regularly worked hours over that 0.4. So the criteria for this, obviously permanent part-time employee, and those who have completed a regular and systematic pattern of additional hours for at least 12 months. So going back to my person that works on a Tuesday and a Thursday example, maybe that's what they are initially employed to do, but for 12 months or more, they have always worked the Wednesday. The next two criteria is that the additional hours are required on an ongoing basis and that they have ongoing funding. So I mentioned CPSU Direct and the keepers of templates. We are member advice and support team, and we can provide you with free on-the-spot advice and industrial answers to your queries. We can also assist in industrial processes such as the application process for conversion to permanency. We keep a lot of templates on hand for members that are seeking these industrial processes. I should also say, sorry, that we have a template for the permanent increase to hours for the permanent part-time employees, but I've also included a list on other information that we have on hand and are able to provide to members. If you have any queries, you can contact us at CPSU Direct email that's listed at the top of your screen. You can also contact us via the CPSU website or get us on the phone. We're on line 1. Now, we are up to question time, and I did see that a couple had come through, so sorry to those who asked, but I'm going to be pulling up my computer so that I can see them a bit better. I see that someone has asked, does it need to be all criteria together? That's a good question. When it comes to these application processes, you need to satisfy all of the criteria in the considerations, or at least have a very strong and compelling points on the majority of them. So for instance, in the conversion to permanency, you would have to satisfy the 12 months. That is your first step to going through this process. You'd also need to show that the position is required on an ongoing basis. So for instance, sometimes when there is a project role, it might not be required on an ongoing basis and it falls flat at that hurdle. Performance is satisfactory. You would need to show that your performance is satisfactory, but as I said, unless there's any evidence to the contrary that by your PDPs that you haven't been meeting the standards, that one's not much of an issue. Again, with merit, if you've been selected for the fixed term position through a selection process, that one's already ticked off because you wouldn't have received the position if you didn't have merit. The only one that you as the applicant may not be able to satisfy by yourself is that there is no other reasons that the head of agency shouldn't convert your employment status. Sometimes it might be in the works that you don't know about the funding. That could be a reason that the head of agency might not convert, but you can still make a very strong argument as to why your status should be converted, even if you can't necessarily get into the head of agency, if that makes sense. Someone has asked fixed term to permanent conversion. Doesn't say role, it says duties. Yes, that is correct. So previously, I'm sorry if I had a slip of the tongue and said role. Previously, the only way in which a fixed term employee would be able to get to permanent through an industrial process, other than applying for a permanent job, was to apply to have a role converted to permanent, and then they would have to reapply. That was one of the really hard barriers that a lot of fixed term employees face, because it had a really high standard that needed to be met. So I'm sorry if I had a slip of the tongue there. It is about duties, not so much the role, but you have to be performing those duties for 12 months. What if you are unattached from your substantive? While you may be unattached from your substantive, your permanency within an agency is tied to you, your classification, and your hours. It's not necessarily to your substantive role. So even if you have relinquished your position, you still retain permanency within that agency. So that might come into play if you were to apply for the fixed term to permanent conversion. Oh, thank you. Good to know that I didn't have a slip of the tongue. It's just, as I said before, this change to the ED, whereby fixed terms can apply for their own personal conversion, is quite new. For quite a long time, we've been focusing on that previous conversion of the role rather than of the person. And unfortunately, with that previous conversion method, the high bar was something like you've been performing that role for 36 months. It was required on an ongoing basis. The role would then be changed to permanent. And in some situations, that person that had been performing the role for 36 months had to reapply for the position. So majority of cases, they would be successful in getting that role once it had become permanent. But unfortunately, it wasn't a guarantee that they automatically got the position, which is why we campaigned so hard for this conversion for fixed term employees so that they had much greater job security. They didn't have to be in the role as long, and they also didn't have to reapply for the role once the role had been made permanent. Also too, it is worth saying that if questions come to you later on, after we finish the recording, or if you have questions about your own personal circumstances that you just want some clarification on how to apply, you're more than welcome to contact us after this is finished and we can have a chat about your personal circumstances, or if you think of it later, answer the questions that you had. But if no one else has any other questions, that might be the end of today's Lunch and Learn. So thank you everyone for joining us today on the new ED1 conversions, both for fixed term to permanent and permanent increase to hours. Really great to see you all, and we'll hopefully be back before the end of the year with another Lunch and Learn, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. People.